Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to some of you and peace out to the rest of you. This is, as you know, the blackest hearted, blackest minded, blackest man on social media, signing black in and shining again, asking you to hit the share button because the message is more important than the messenger. So here's the deal. Yesterday I went ham on any racist who called themselves Muslim. And I told them in Arabic, even though all Muslims don't speak Arabic, that either they learn to see this our way or they will be brainwashed even more by whites to see it their way and will join them in a conflict probably like this one. And in short, I told them that they need some black awareness. But I also told them this in a longer form because some terms in English we have aren't direct translations in Arabic, or I don't know them, like black awareness or being pro-black. I don't know how to express those concepts in Arabic. I can just explain them. Frankly, I'm nowhere near fluent in Arabic anyway, and I can't understand everything people say, so I don't speak any national or regional dialect, just the textbook form, so those are the limits. But see, I have to have a separate conversation with non-black Muslims and with non-black people in general from the one that we have to have internally. And this is one we got to have internally, which is why I could start off with the peace greeting. So if you see inconsistency, it's not hypocrisy, but rather it's going to be me telling each side what they need to hear so that justice has at least been spoken if it will not be done. It will at least be spoken by me in case the sincere people on both sides want to reach out to each other. Now, this is surprising to some of you to hear me say this, I know, because even my militant behind still has to be fair to people, even if it is someone I hate. My hatred does not give me the right to blame someone for something they didn't do. And if I hate them, they're guilty already of something else, and I can focus on that. This is a rule of life that can benefit any of us. I only exonerate white Western communities of one thing regarding white supremacy, and that is the beginning of it. Because the evidence shows they got the ideas from others. They took it to another level, though. A far more violent and dangerous level, and for this I will not only not exonerate them, but will not tolerate any of you niggas exonerating them either. They are the problem in common between us and the people we now are telling that they cannot be allies of us. Now, I've already told Latin Americans years ago, before I was black mind or black heart, depending on where they're from, not to look to me to do any of their dances or expect me to act like them because frankly I didn't appreciate the anti-blackness. And I didn't know if they would have been so welcoming if I was darker. I expect today Latin Americans' attitudes to vary with their own complexions and their countries of origin. As an example, I don't expect Colombians to be as hostile to us as Mexicans. Colombians are generally better educated and they have a saying that there is no Colombia without Africa, but before Colombia there was always Africa. A little side note, by the way, a lot of you niggas can't spell Colombia. So please stop coming into my comment section misspelling all this stuff. Columbia is not spelled with a U. The District of Columbia is spelled with a U. Columbia. The country is not. British Columbia is spelled with a U. The country in South America is only spelled with two O's. So getting back to this, Colombians who aren't black have told me with pride that there are villages wherein the first African descendants still speak African languages alongside their Spanish. On the other hand, Mexicans will act like there's no such thing as a black Latino. There can't be, let alone a black Mexican, ignoring Costa Chica altogether. I'm not talking about the country Costa Rica. I'm talking about a coastline called Costa Chica, which is largely black. So shuck their fit. The conversation with Latin Americans is different, but most of us have already had that. So let me explain this idea of no allies as it pertains to other groups of people, especially those with more ancient cultures, like the Arabs, the Persians, the Afghans, Pakistanis, Indians, Bengalis, these groups mostly. The first person I ever heard and saw say that black people have no friends was John Henry Clark. And he actually surmised this from historical observations as he studied history, and he did study it thoroughly. He was a contemporary of Malcolm X, and he said that the one time King and Malcolm met, they had a meeting of the minds. He was present, and for the safety of many other black people, he was sworn to secrecy about the agreement they reached, but he was allowed to say to us that they reached an agreement. Matter of fact, John Henry Clark told this to my mother personally, and I'm sure she's not the only person to whom he told this. Oh yeah, I told you, my parents ran in those circles. So he got this idea from the history of Egypt's invasions by Hyksos people. However, John Henry Clark described Africa to us in terms of Western Central Africa and before invasions of any outsiders. Now, in those days, there were prisons, but they weren't a big business. He said we had no word for prisons or nursing homes because they weren't things in Africa and there was no need for them. This was partially true, but not completely. And it wasn't throughout Africa as a whole because Africa's a big place. If you can ball Africa up and throw it in the sky, it would equal the moon in size. So it's impossible that all Africa was the same. But with respect to Western Central Africa, I don't have evidence that he was lying, but just that he didn't specify which civilization didn't have these things. Because there were many just in those two regions. The thing is, he does mention the invasions of outsiders into Africa, but the only time Middle Easterners invaded Africa were two times. Once was when the Hyksos, who were probably black themselves, invaded ancient Kemet. And then when the Arabs invaded North Africa in two different waves. Now the Morabit invasion of ancient Morocco into the Mali or Songhai empires, whichever one it was supposed to be. I also heard it was a Ghana empire. I think it was a Ghana empire. My memory's just bad right now. But that invasion didn't happen as they say. They walked in because of internal decay, but they couldn't have taken over by force. In those days, if you weren't from tropical forests, then you could not penetrate them to take over without two things, guns and quinine. And how whites colonized southeastern Asia before quinine, I honestly don't know. But the guns helped them. But we're talking about black Africa. Arabs invading tropical Africa was impossible. An army trying to even march through would have died of malaria, guaranteed. See, individual Arabs were businessmen, and they went into the tropics as businessmen, but they weren't in crowds guaranteed to draw mosquitoes that would infect them with malaria either. From these businessmen, because of Islamic business practices, the leaders of these areas were impressed. So they accepted Islam, and the people followed their kings and leaders. This was how Islam spread, ironically, in Western Africa, Eastern Africa, and in Southeast Asia too. No conquest. Berber people had to be conquered to accept it, just like the Arabs before them had to be conquered in Mecca to accept Islam, because Arabs like that. But this myth of Islam spreading by the sword, especially in Africa, the myth is true for the Arabs because look at their mindset. But the myth is not true in Africa. Tropical Africa, I mean. The political boundaries of the Islamic Empire spread by both the sword and by some people just accepting to be annexed. It happened both ways as empires spread. And I make no apologies for the spread by force because the Zulu, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, Bakongo, and Mutapa empires that we take so much pride in also spread by both voluntary annexing and conquest. Most empires spread this way. But on a personal level, a forced conversion is not a conversion, and this is known by any Muslim. So despite my hatred of the colorism of many Muslims who aren't black, or who are, or who don't know they're black, I can't say that they invaded Africa. I can't say they forced personal conversions, and I can't say they're uniformly against us as a race. Notice I said uniformly, because see, there's a division within them as it pertains to us. We black folks have seen prior generations of Latinos in the 70s join us in marches, start the Brown Panthers, Brown Brigades, and all of this, and in turn and take white privilege when things cool down. And today, those older Mexicans and Dominicans can't look at us as equals, can they? What about the kids, though? See, we saw the Chinese not protest like us during the 60s, and all of a sudden, the yellow peril wasn't that perilous anymore. And the Chinese already in the USA were majority Confucians, so they weren't the same as, or they weren't viewed the same as an atheist communist in China at that time. So they got to move up a little bit because of their relative non-resistance to white supremacy. Then the Indians, Pakistanis, and Arabs came in as engineers and doctors, and what did they do? We saw it. Immediately they sided with whites against us and sought their acceptance as though they weren't the relatives of their colonizers back home. Meaning they sought their acceptance, they sought the white acceptance in America as though these white folks weren't the cousins of the British that colonized them, or the French sometimes. So we black folks, we saw all of this happen, and now here we are today, black-annoyed. And we're saying to each other that we have no friends, meaning no allies. So today we believe that the whole world has an instinct to act like our Western European kidnappers and enslavers and colonizers as soon as they see our nose and lips and color and hair. I mean, we even think they're born with this as an instinct, and I can kind of see why if you're not careful. But still, those folks that march with us sometimes and sold us out just about every time were a generation ago, older than even my ancient behind is. I'm in my early 40s. The ones that are coming to us are their kids, not them. And in Western countries where they live and are coming to protest with us, they've already argued with their elders about this and called them out. And they're shocked that we don't trust them, because they don't even know that we listen to our elders and learn to not trust them and to expect them to do the same as their parents did. You see, they've argued with their parents so that they can come and walk over to us. They've been having these arguments. And they don't know that while they had to argue with their elders, they don't realize that we could afford to listen to many of ours because our elders were not necessarily as oppressive towards us as theirs were. Our elders lied to us about men and women to a certain extent. They didn't know about how our attitudes have shifted over the last decades towards them. And this is unfortunate because we're now telling the younger generation that doesn't mean us any harm to kiss off because of what the older generation did, because we're not making a distinction. We're assuming that because they come from these cultures, they are just like their elders, when in fact, no, they're not just like them. Frankly, I've seen an attitude shift towards even black folks of my phenotype. I'm distrusted at some protest. An African American in Copenhagen who was a mixed dual citizen recently got shouted down at a protest for George Floyd over there in Copenhagen, Denmark, because he's also Danish. And he got shouted down, and he was told by militant black folks over there to shut the shuck up and sit down and say nothing. Now, he was already mistaken for a non-black Arab. He was distrusted and assumed to be trying to hijack the protest momentum for the cause of Palestine. Our black annoy is already costing us not only potential allies, on which I would never tell you to rely anyway, but it is making enemies unnecessarily for us, which is bad, and not only with non-blacks, but even with black folks too. This is not the time for that division within. And I'll tell you now, one reason I don't do this in person is that as soon as a ninja interrupts me with some crap I already heard, I might shoot them or beat their head in with a temper tantrum. Not because they have their own mind, but because they interrupted me with some dumb stuff that I've already heard about me not being black enough, and I'm no longer going to forgive such interruptions or assumptions. We can't afford to be dumb ninjas. We must be ready to consider all possibilities, but slow to jump to conclusions without evidence to back them up. We currently are the opposite. We're quick to assume the worst and too slow to consider possibilities, especially a possibility to give somebody the benefit of the doubt, be they black or not, but especially if they're black. This is our undoing. History has shown us something, and we keep missing it. History has shown us that even many whites, and especially other non-whites who aren't black, don't agree with violence against us and don't agree with our oppression. However, they don't want to look like us. So we're confused about our relationship to others because we don't know the extent to which they can sympathize. I mean, on one hand, they don't all lynch us the way white folk did, but then we can't marry their daughters or their sons as easily as we could marry white daughters and sons. So this has confused us. No, you don't understand. That's exactly what it is. They'll march with you to a certain extent, but when it comes to social equality, they're not necessarily against it, but they'll sell you out if they fear that their kids are going to view you as equals and start marrying you because they're not ready to share grandkids with us. Even many white abolitionists weren't integrationists during slavery. They just simply thought we should not be enslaved and treated like property. They figured we're also human, but they didn't want us living together and mixing. They didn't want to vanish themselves. They simply didn't want us to be oppressed. They weren't ready for black in-laws and black grandchildren. We're now seeing the same with these other groups. They may disagree with us being killed, and they know that cops are jerks with them at times too. So they believe that cops killing us is wrong, and they know the conservative talking points are deflection tactics, so they'll go against them, but they realize that up close they don't want to become us, and they don't want their grandchildren to be us. They don't want to share our blood any more than they already do, even though they don't want us to be treated as wild and dangerous animals. Also, outside the West, many people don't know that we're experiencing what we experience in the West. That young Arab or Pakistani living with you in the West may have some idea, depending on what others have told him, but his parents don't know and don't want to know. And his cousins back in the homeland certainly just don't know to the same extent that he does. They often see the propaganda in the movies and they think racism's over. I couldn't get Arabs here to realize that racism is still alive over there at first, and I hated a few of them for it. They thought there was racism against Arabs and other Muslims, but not against black people anymore. I was like, no, it's still there. I escaped it. Guess what happened though? 2016, they found out that it was still there. Now in 2020, they found out again. The propaganda is failing, but this truth is new information to them. And they live in places where they can't demonstrate legally in streets like in Western countries. This doesn't mean that the governments are in favor of the mistreatment of us either. They just can't come out in the streets in front of the U.S. embassies in every single Arab nation. Now, they're allowed to say on social media that they aren't with the show a bit. And guess what? They're using Twitter and other social media to say so. Instagram, Snapchat, and Twitter are abuzz in Arabic and Urdu and Turkish and Amazigh and other languages I don't even know the names of, trashing their officers, trashing the system, and even the people in their own nations who aren't waking up to this. Yeah, you see, you know what Arabs are saying now? They're saying these are the same people who run Israel and kill the Palestinians. Now, are they wrong for talking about that? No, they're making a comparison with what they know. That's a normal thing for anybody to do. I mean, when we black folks, pro-blacks, talk to people from the motherland, we make the same comparison. Your colonizer was my kidnapper and enslaver. You see? People compare problems when they find commonalities. That's normal. That doesn't mean that they don't care about your issue. These Arabs are now saying these are the same ones who colonized India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. These are the same ones who make movies and depict us as animals and terrorists. That's what they're saying now. Also, an Arab told me today that most of them are just learning the extent of the discrimination we face in the USA and the West. And a Gulf Arab told me this today. He told me this morning. His people may not want to marry us in mixed bloodlines. That is the case, which is cool, actually. But they find it outrageous if someone sees the video and tries to justify killing us. They find it outrageous that a medical examiner tried to come up with a ruling that exonerated the officer, and the family had to get another medical independent examiner to do an autopsy and find out that no, he was actually compressed and the blood flow to his brain was restricted. They thought racism was old news until this video, because this is getting more coverage than the summer 2016. Another Arab told me that the ones whose tweets of which you saw the screenshots in my video yesterday were only 5% of the people in the Gulf countries, the people with that attitude, the 5% in the Gulf, which are less racist than the non-Gulf Arab countries. Oh yeah. He said the others were, and mind you, don't get it twisted, they got racism. But the Gulf is actually the least racist towards black folks. Lebanon, they're racist to everybody. North Africa, they're racist towards black folks. But he said that the others were against this. Even if they don't want to marry us, they're still against these Arabs that put up those posts of which you saw the screenshots and the translations yesterday. I'm not making light of the anti-blackness in Arab countries, but I am telling you these details so that you can make decisions, so that we can make decisions based on facts and not based on false perceptions, because we black folks got a lot of misconceptions. It's not always our fault. But we jump to conclusions and make decisions on misconceptions. I want you to know that anti-blackness is not uniform across the globe. And in some places, it is actually absent. There are Arabs in France that want to be black, believe it or not. One moved to Senegal and married a black woman so his kids could be black. He's blacker than his wife in that regard, who married him and decreased the blackness of her kids, according to many of us, including my black militant tail. So what should we say to these non-black youngsters who come to support us at this time? What's an answer that's both fair to them if they're sincere, and is also fair to us and self-respecting? It's simple when we think about it. We must first realize that John Henry Clark was a man with flaws like us, and he wanted us to not be so easily backstabbed. That's commendable, but he was not a prophet, let alone a God. He did not claim to be a prophet or a God. He read about the past. He didn't look back through time like God can do to see it as it happened. He read about it in his own time. He didn't know the future, and he never claimed he did either. So yes, we can have allies. It's up to others if they ally with us or not, but we can have them. However, I'm not saying friends, I'm saying allies. However, these allies are the same as friends in one particular way. This is what I mean. These allies are individuals, not communities. An Indian youth, a Pakistani youth, an Arab youth, or a Latino youth can be our allies if they're sincere, but their communities cannot. You see, these youth are not their parents yet. They also aren't necessarily or automatically our enemies the way that their parents are. They argue with their elders. But the elders control the communities, and therefore these individuals can come as individuals, but we can't expect the elders to come trailing behind with their organizations and financial help and their community consensus. And we can't expect either age group or generation to come trying to marry us and mix bloodlines. Frankly, we shouldn't be looking for that either. This will require a different relationship with their communities. No matter how individualistic marriages may be to us, we should not accept to marry individuals whose communities, meaning whose decision-making elders and whose cultures, don't remember that we're equal to them, even our genetic equality to them. If they come from cultures wherein blackness is uglier than whiteness, don't marry them. That's what I'm saying. That's what I've been saying. Unless, of course, you and her are going to, yes, I said it like the way specifically, you and her are going to move somewhere where her family cannot have any influence over her. Her community can't have any influence over her. Just as they wrinkle their nose at the thought of intermarriage, we should wrinkle our noses at them, to be honest, and refuse such for our kids as well, until their elders are replaced by egalitarian youth of today. Then we can be neutral about intermarriage. Many of our people conflate political alliances with wanting to marry and screw in mixed genes. And we should take them separately like they do. Their humanity doesn't depend on their acceptance of sharing grandkids with us, just as ours doesn't depend on either's acceptance of such. So to you youth who aren't black or don't know you're black, here's the answer. I'm addressing you with this answer, especially to those of you who are Muslim. You can't represent us, but your sincerity is appreciated, and many of you may not even be trying to represent us. But your parents, if they agree to your individual alliance, would expect you to represent us because they don't remember how equal we are. And therefore, there is a difference between you referring to your own causes and their commonalities with ours just as a reference, while you're still being mindful and objective and honest about the differences, versus you using our cause to draw momentum to your own. One is different than the other. And it's our responsibility as black folk to be mindful of the differences so that we don't treat one like the other. It is your responsibility to be mindful and to not use our cause to draw momentum to yours. You have to understand, we've already been there for your causes. You ain't been there for ours. Or rather, we've been there for your parents' causes. Your parents weren't there for ours. And as a Muslim, I'm all for the overarching cause against oppression and for justice, wherein we oppose the oppressors of black people, the oppressors of Palestine, the oppressors of Kashmir. I'm all for that. But this means fighting white supremacy. And this means fighting against the sensibilities and slave mentalities of your parents who were colonized and brainwashed like we were. You will have to understand that we black folks, with all the features that your parents didn't want you to be born with, are miles ahead of your parents in fighting the brainwashing, and that in this measurement, we are superior to them, despite the populations in Africa and outside that use skin bleach, despite the fact that skin bleach sells in your countries and in our continent and countries. We still are better than your parents in that regard because we have a resistance to that trend, whereas your people don't have a resistance to this. You must understand that your alliance, well, let me rephrase that. Our resistance to this trend is older than any resistance your country might have if your country has a resistance. You must understand that your alliance is your individual decision, subject to our scrutiny for evidence of your sincerity, and we're not required to trust all of you, and that it is not the decision of your community, and that we don't owe your community an alliance in return for your individual alliance with us. You come, you with us, fine. That doesn't mean we now owe it to your community to go marching for Palestine next time. You must understand that should your elders decide on an alliance at a community level, that we would then still scrutinize them, and this will be contingent upon them accepting our moral superiority over the colonizer/oppressor, meaning that Western European white man we were both brainwashed to uphold and love unconditionally. because even many of the Western European whites themselves today now are sick of their oppressors. You must understand that your genetic distinction from us is normal, but that even your cultural preference for the palest, most European-looking marriage partners is offensive and can cancel such an alliance because it means you value their DNA over not just ours, but even over your own. Are you listening, Arabs? We're not required to respect such a preference in you as an individual preference because they're actually cultural preferences, and we're not required to respect any culture or custom that favor whites over us, meaning favors whites over you or over us. You must understand that if we request of you an assignment that makes you a traitor to your own community and its elders, so damn what? Carry it out if you reasonably can, or we'll not believe you're really an ally. Carry it out and we'll support you to our capabilities. Understand that you will at some point be required to go against your elders in an open manner, and that it is their fault, not ours or yours, unless, of course, they agree as a community to change the culture, undo the brainwashing, and become allies collectively. That's a different story, but we know that's not happening. Simply put, they would have to be pro-black at some point to become an allied community, and since this is not even something we have unanimously defined, we can't expect them to be such. We have not unanimously defined pro-blackness, so we don't even expect them to come in like that. You individually can, and this is appreciated as much as anyone would appreciate an ally. However, keep in mind that in the future, you can't go the route your parents and elders went in trying to gain white approval at our expense, and you must agree to this. If you fear you will fall into this tomorrow, do not approach us as an ally today. To black folks, again, I want you to understand that it's okay to confront international and intercultural anti-blackness. But notice I don't call it global because it's not everywhere in the world. It's just most places. But it will require you to study it to do so correctly. Many of you are trying to do it without actually studying it. I've studied it from the time that I was 18. If you don't study it and you try to confront it, you will make enemies unnecessarily, and this is not affordable. Also, black folks, if you're willing to be hostile to everyone that isn't black, but is out there protesting with us, then you better be aggressive with that Western European white man who got all of us and them. You better not say no more crap about all the Arabs and then exonerate that devil. If you're a Trump supporter, but you think every Arab is your enemy by blood and instinct, you're dangerous to even black folks. We don't need you, but you need to shrink. I think I've said enough for now. Thank you for listening. Go ahead and hit the share button, as I've said, because the message is more important than the messenger. Assalamu alaikum.